All right, we're standing in downtown Greenville outside the Carroll Campbell U.S. District Courthouse, where attorneys representing multiple survivors, not victims, they want to be very clear about that, multiple survivors of the RockStar cheer sexual abuse scandal gave a press conference today announcing their plans to file an imminent lawsuit against multiple defendants in connection with this scandal, which broke on FITSNews earlier this week. Now, for those of you just catching up on this story, 49-year-old Scott Foster, the owner and founder of RockStar Cheer, committed suicide near Paris Mountain, just north of Greenville, South Carolina, a week ago yesterday. Foster, the next day, as FITSNews exclusively reported, was revealed to be the subject of an ongoing federal investigation involving allegations of sexual assault, potentially involving dozens of victims dating back decades. This story has since spiraled, folks. And as we heard today from the attorneys at the press conference, there are multiple defendants, not only RockStar Cheer, not only the estate of Scott Foster, but also the federation which governs cheer competition across the country, the USASF, the All-Star Federation, and Varsity, which is the corporate entity which dominates the market share of the cheer industry in the United States, which is, again, a multi-billion-dollar industry. Folks, this story has ripple effects we don't even know yet, but count on FITSNews to continue driving this narrative as you follow this story of RockStar Cheer and its late founder, Scott Foster.
Yeah. So good morning. My name is Bakari Sellers. I'm from the Strom Law Firm. Today with me we have Jessica Fickling and Ali Benevento. That's Ben, B-E-N, even E-V-E-N 2-T-O. They're from the Strom Law Firm as well. And then I have James Bannister, who comes before you today. He is from Bannister, Wyatt and Stalvey. We have come together in what has become one of the most devastating and tragic occurrences of institutional failure and sexual abuse that we've seen, in line with the likes of Michigan State, USA Gymnastics, and many other national cases that you hear about. The way this is going to work this morning is we are going to allow Mr. Bannister to come up and speak first, followed by Jessica, followed by Ali, and then I will close. We will take any questions that you all have. One of the things that we are doing right now is protecting the names of our survivors. We don't call them victims, we call them survivors. And I want to give a special shout out to FITSNews, who I believe is here as well, for covering this from the very beginning. This has been a story that's been bubbling up in this community for a very long period of time. But I'll tell you, we have victims that go as far west as San Diego, California, that some are nearly 40 years old, some as young as still minors today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bannister, and we'll go in that order.
Thank you, Bakari. This started probably about 6 to 8 weeks ago. There were a few very brave young girls who were willing to come forward. And what I think is important to know is that they came forward despite intimidation, threats from RockStar Cheer and the folks that were close to Scott Foster. And more importantly, especially for young girls, they were willing to risk the social stigma of coming forward. That's a big deal for young girls still in high school. And I want to just give them the credit that they deserve for having had the courage to do that, because I don't think that we would be here today but for those few young girls having the courage to say, I am not going to let this happen to somebody else, no matter what happens to me, by coming forward. We know, as Mr. Sellers has pointed out, that this has likely been going on for more than a decade. Scott Foster knew that he was going to have to face the victims that were the subject of his sexual predatorship. He knew that this was going to be a moment where the light was going to be shined on what I think will turn out to be a coven of sexual predators surrounding RockStar. Just because he is deceased does not mean that the investigation is over. There is currently a federal investigation and a state investigation. We have been asked not to name the agency or the agents because it would potentially interfere with the investigation, and so we're going to honor that. But the investigation is ongoing. We need other people to come forward to tell their story. We need people to come forward to expose the individuals who are also sexual predators in this group, that covered up what was going on, that facilitated bringing these young girls to Scott Foster and others. We need to make sure that the crosshairs of justice are pointed at the right people so that justice can be served. And I'm glad that Strom Law Firm and these other attorneys are going to be joining and working with us to make sure that that happens. Thank you.
I want to reiterate a few things. We've talked about the fact that we are not going to call these women and these men, because they are men and women, we're not going to call them victims. We are so fortunate to be able to represent some of these individuals, and what we want to do in our investigation is to continue to shed light. Transparency is so important to our system, and transparency is what we hope to gain through our investigation into the other entities, not just Scott Foster, not just his institution, but the other institutional failures that go further up, that encompass what we believe to be a culture. Because this didn't just happen in a vacuum. This was allowed to happen because of power, unbridled power, where these individuals felt comfortable taking advantage of children. That's what this is about. This is sexual assault, but this is also physical abuse, and this is a dynamic of power that we hope to uncover, shed light on, and stop right here. My name is Jessica Fickling. I'm with the Strom Law Firm, and again, I'm here with a group of competent attorneys, and it's now our job to take care of these individuals. They have been brave, they have come forward, and what we want them to understand is that if they continue to come forward, we will be a safe harbor for them to tell their story so that we can shed light and stop this in the biggest and widest reach that we can.
Good morning. My name is Allie Benevento. I also practice with Bakari Sellers and Jessica Fickling at the Strom Law Firm. And I think what my colleagues have said, we just want to make it very clear that these institutions went to great lengths to protect and enable predators and sexual abusers rather than taking steps to protect the children that they had a responsibility to protect. They went to great lengths to hush, to silence, and to intimidate the people that were victimized, and we plan to hold them accountable. And we do need help doing that. We do ask that anybody with information, whether you yourself have been victimized, whether you are a survivor of this behavior, whether you have witnessed this behavior, whether you have information to provide, to please come forward. We believe that there is power in a chorus of voices, and we would encourage you to please reach out to us. Thank you.
I will kind of summarize. We do plan on filing an action sooner rather than later against not only RockStar, but USASF, which is a regulatory nonprofit governing body. We will be going after Varsity as well, which is the for-profit entity. Jessica is going to nudge me in my back because I'm stealing her quote when we begin to unravel this, which is that, again, you see it's a legal theory that is as old as the day is long, where people put profit over people. And that's what we saw here. We've actually identified other defendants. We've identified other organizations. And we do want this community to know that Scott Foster was not the only abuser. All of the information that we have will be put forth in our complaint, which will come sooner rather than later. But there are multiple cultures involved, and there are multiple institutions involved that failed these young people. Now, please do not yell your questions, but with that, we will take questions. Yes, ma'am.
You've given us a broad brushstroke of the allegations. Can you please provide some specifics with regard to Mr. Foster and what kind of...
Easy enough, so you don't have to get outraged. Mr. Foster, on numerous occasions, pried young women with alcohol and marijuana. We have instances of Mr. Foster not only having sex, but groping young women. There is a whole investigation going on into different things and phones and everything else. I'll let Mr. Bannister maybe step forward and lay out some of those allegations. But our clients were groped, our clients were assaulted, and our clients, many of which were young, had sex with Mr. Foster, and they're not just young women. We represent young men as well. And I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
Well, we know that that law enforcement currently has some of the personal communication devices and computers of Scott Foster, and we anticipate that there will be some more evidence coming from that. But there have been specific narrations of Scott having sex with underage young ladies, of other sexual acts, all of which would fit easily within the parameters of state laws prohibiting criminal sexual conduct with minors.
Yes, ma'am.
How many people are you representing actively at this time, and can you speak to the age range, and I believe you said males and females?
Males and females, we'll just say multiple, not one or two. We believe that there are dozens of victims out there. The age range is, we've had some people who go back 2 decades with Mr. Foster. We have some that are still minors today. It's difficult because if you were abused by Mr. Foster or anyone else or another coach in that community, and you are an adult now and you're a professional and you have a family, many times it's difficult for you to come forward. But we've had a lot of those phone calls even this morning, individuals calling our office, telling us about the abuse that they suffered, some 10 years ago, some a few years ago at the hands of Mr. Foster and others in that gym.
Would you be able to say you're representing 5, 10, 15?
We'll say we represent multiple victims right now.
Can you speak to any specifics about the lack of action or negligence from the United States All-Stars Federation? Well, what we know at this point is that USASF has certain requirements associated with membership. Some of those requirements actually say that USASF will not allow for you to be a member if you don't meet certain parameters. And yet, even with those requirements in place and with allegations coming forward specific to this institution related to Mr. Foster applying alcohol and drugs to underage individuals, USASF did nothing to curb his access to these people. In addition, what we've learned and what we hope to provide more detail into is the fact that there are certain membership requirements and ownership requirements, and that those ownership requirements were either ignored or in some ways purposefully evaded, where ownership would pass from an individual who might not otherwise qualify to someone else who would be qualified, but truly the individual who didn't qualify was left in charge with access to these minors and these people, these athletes. And again, if a parent is supposed to meet certain parameters in order to be a member of an entity, it would be natural for the parent to trust that the organization was going to vet its coaches just as strongly and vet the people in charge just as strongly. If parents are supposed to meet requirements, then those coaches should as well.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there's some news that victims have been threatened if they were to come forward. Can you talk about your specific psychological threats or even the reason of causing them?
So what we know at this point is that the individuals who are close to RockStar Cheer would make life very miserable if for the young girls who were talking about things that had happened. They would encourage them, at least on some occasions, to make stuff up, not to come forward. I will say this, there have been specific threats that have occurred, but I don't want to go into any detail of that for fear that I might jeopardize the victim of those particular threats.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you specify when and where you're going to file this lawsuit?
At this time, we can say it will be imminent.
And where are you going to file?
Again, it'll be imminent, and those details will be forthcoming shortly, and we'll be happy to provide copies of that filing to anyone interested at the point that we file it.
We're having internal debate about whether or not we file it in that courthouse or this courthouse or both courthouses. So just because of the wide range of themes and the wide ranges of causes of action. When I tell you that the uniqueness of this case and that the victims and their different experiences, the failure that happened from varsity, the failure that happened from USASF, not just the estate of Scott Foster. We'll be listing multiple defendants in this case. We'll be listing Scott Foster. We'll be listing Varsity, USASF, RockStar, and even other cheer facilities in the area as well. And so this is a culture that I'm new to. I have 2 3-year-olds, 1 boy, 1 girl, and I have a 17-year-old. My 17-year-old's in volleyball. So I'm not a cheer parent, but I can tell you that if anything like what is happening in this cheer community happened to my daughter, I would be outraged, or son for that matter. Just the utter disregard for young people has me sick to my stomach. The perverse nature of the acts that were done, how they, I know the first question was, give me some specific incidents. I mean, we have video of Scott Foster on Snapchat with beer bongs, drinking with his underage cheerleaders. I mean, the stories that these young men and women share, the emails that we get, the direct messages that we get, just about pictures and acts and just disgusting behavior from people who were set out to be in charge and protect your children. And this is something that this community failed because it happened right under our nose. A couple more questions, because I'm sweating from all my...
Jim, you had mentioned that there was reason to believe there's a coven of abusers. Is that to say that there were other perpetrators of physical abuse, or just that it was...
Yes.
I think there are other individuals who engaged in sexual abuse. We also think that there were other individuals who knew what was going on, who facilitated bringing girls in and out to put them in a position where they were compromised. With Scott, you have to understand that Scott Foster occupied a position of authority and trust. He made it his business to get the trust of the parents. Some of the entities that they've talked about certified Scott and these gyms as being safe places to go. And literally spoonful by spoonful, he would chip away at their safety nets that were around them, the parents and themselves. And so that just doesn't happen unless you have other people that knew about it, facilitated it, and worked with Scott, and then covered up, I think, is what we expect to see. Thank you.
We know of at least one other specific incident of a coach having sex with an underage minor. Yes.
From
Another
RockStar.
coach.
From
Yes.
all the way from California. Are you representing victims in other states as well?
Yes. Well, victims they've gone. They've lived their lives. They're all over the country. I mean, there's some minors that are still here. Pardon me for the traffic. We'll figure out a better location next time. This is Bannister's fault. But some of them are as far west as California. They're all over the country, North Carolina, because they've gone on and lived their lives.
You said this could be filed here or there, so it could be a federal.
We are examining all those possible alternatives. A couple more questions.
Was the other instance of another coach having sex with a minor, was that a local incident? Was that a national?
It's a local incident.
Okay. 2 questions. North Carolina. Do you have victims in North Carolina?
Yes.
If you recall, was it a similar story that they are telling?
Yes, many of the stories, particularly where sex is involved, included alcohol and drugs.
USASF and Varsity Spirit. Can you talk in specifics about what facts you have right now of people who worked or were the director or the president, chair, board members who had knowledge? Because we all know, by living our lives, people talk. What facts do you have right now that people within those may or may not have had knowledge of?
Well, we
what's going on?
do know that there was knowledge of behavior that was untoward, Mr. Foster towards young people. There were suspensions that were had. There's evidence that he drank with these young people. There's video that he drank with these young people. We know for a fact that he was suspended for a point of time, and that absolutely did nothing to prevent him from his interaction with the program. Varsity is a profit-driven organization. We believe that Varsity was aware of Mr. Foster's behavior and the behavior of many of those in RockStar and coaches around, and still did nothing. We'll explore this and flesh this out a little bit more in our complaint coming later this week, but we can tell you that both of those entities either knew or should have known of the behavior of Mr. Foster and RockStar and still failed to protect our children. Is that okay? You got anything to add? We'll do one more question, and then we'll be around. Yes.
Are you concerned that any of the girls and boys still enlisted there could be in danger right now?
And you can ask as well.
Yes, I was going to ask if you could elaborate on where these incidents occurred and whether law enforcement locally was involved.
Local law enforcement is involved, and we're talking about at least primarily in Greenville County.
Some happen in tournaments on the road, but primarily in Greenville County. But sometimes they were transported. They were transported across state lines to various tournaments. They were assaulted at tournaments that were run by varsity, that were sanctioned by USASF, in bathrooms, in hotel rooms, etc.
I know that you want to, like in other cases that we have seen over the last 7 years, the chorus of people begins to sway and convince the public. Why is it important that people come forward beyond just this case with regard to these two entities, USASF and Varsity Spirit?
It's important that people come forward so that these entities can be held accountable. I think it's been made very clear that this wasn't just the work of numerous bad actors, but rather a culture of enabling and covering up that bad behavior, a culture of creating an atmosphere where this wasn't just known to occur, where this action by people was facilitated. And so it's important that people who've had experience in this culture, people who've been victimized by this type of behavior, come forward so that these entities can be held accountable, not just for the bad behavior, but for the culture of enabling and abuse that they have perpetuated.
So we just want to close by saying again, we need people to come forward. We are here to tell your story. We are here as a safe harbor for you. And that's not just the victims themselves, but the families. This doesn't happen without a systemic push to convince families that your children are safe, right? What happened here was that these institutions convinced parents, convinced guardians, convinced caretakers that we will take care of your children. And instead, they took their children and they physically and sexually and mentally abused them. So, if you are a survivor, if you have a child who is in this system and you're unsure of where to turn, if you have questions, make sure that you reach out to our firm, the Strom Law Firm, or Mr. Bannister's firm, because we are here to try to answer those questions and to navigate this with you. And again, we are stronger together facing these entities than we are alone.
Thank you all. We'll have another major update in this case as the week goes on, and we'll make sure that all of you all are notified and get a copy of what is filed.
Thank you.
Thank you.